She thought she knew the man she'd loved for 30 years. Until one night, at his glittering retirement party, the perfect husband's darkest secrets unraveled in front of everyone. An affair with a younger co-worker, a shocking confrontation, and a twist no one saw coming. This is the true story of betrayal, revenge, and a wife's ultimate quest for justice. Stay tuned, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The golden light of the chandeliers bathed the banquet hall in a warm, inviting glow. Laughter and the clinking of glasses filled the air as servers weaved through the crowd, balancing trays of hors d'oeuvres and champagne flutes. Sarah stood near the edge of the room, her fingers lightly grazing the edge of a champagne glass she hadn't yet tasted. Her lips curved in a polite smile, but her eyes betrayed her unease, scanning the crowd for her husband, James. James was at the center of attention, as always, shaking hands and exchanging hearty laughs with his colleagues. His tailored suit fit impeccably, his silver hair adding an air of distinction. Tonight was his night, the culmination of decades of hard work and success. Yet, as Sarah watched him, she couldn't shake the pit in her stomach, a gnawing sensation that had become her constant companion in recent months. She felt like an outsider in her own life, observing from the sidelines, unable to piece together when or why the shift had occurred. The crowd erupted into cheers as someone raised a glass in a toast. Sarah glanced at James, catching a flicker of something unspoken in his eyes. She followed his gaze, and there she was, Rebecca. Younger, vibrant, with an easy charm that seemed to draw people in. Rebecca stood near the bar, her laugh too bright, her movements too poised, and her gaze lingering just a moment too long on James. Sarah's stomach clenched. For months there had been signs, late nights at the office, a newfound interest in his appearance, expensive cologne, tailored suits, even a gym membership he never mentioned. Then there was the first slip-up, small but significant. A text message, dismissed too quickly, followed by an awkward smile and a hasty explanation. Sarah had pushed her doubts aside, chalking it up to paranoia. But tonight, every glance, every whispered exchange felt like confirmation of her deepest fears. A hand touched her shoulder, and she turned to see Laura, her closest friend, smiling warmly. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," Laura said softly, her voice barely audible over the din of the party. Sarah forced a laugh. "Just a long day, that's all." But Laura's knowing gaze lingered. "You sure that's it?" Before Sarah could answer, a waiter approached with a tray. She took a flute of champagne and sipped, grateful for the distraction. Laura stayed by her side, offering a silent but steady presence. Sarah appreciated it more than she could express, though she doubted even Laura could comprehend the storm swirling inside her. As the evening wore on, the speeches began. One by one, James's colleagues took the microphone, recounting stories of his brilliance, his leadership, and his camaraderie. The room filled with laughter and applause, each anecdote painting James as the perfect professional, the perfect man. Sarah's grip on her glass tightened with each word. To everyone else, he was a hero. To her, he had become a stranger. Then came James's turn to speak. He stood at the podium, his smile broad and his voice steady, thanking everyone for their support and sharing stories of his career. The room hung on his every word. Sarah watched him closely, noting the confidence in his tone, the way his charm enveloped the room. But beneath the polished exterior she saw it, the flicker of guilt, of unease. It was fleeting, but she caught it, and it confirmed what she already knew. As James spoke, his eyes darted briefly to Rebecca, who stood at the back of the room. Sarah saw the exchange, so quick it might have gone unnoticed by anyone else, but not by her. It was all the proof she needed. Her chest tightened, anger and heartbreak clashing in her mind. She wanted to scream, to shout the truth for everyone to hear, but she stayed silent. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. Instead, she sipped her champagne, her mind racing, formulating the confrontation she knew was inevitable. Tonight was the beginning of the end. The ride home from the party was cloaked in an uncomfortable silence. The city lights flickered past the car windows, casting fleeting shadows on Sarah's face. James drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting casually on the gear shift, his expression calm, almost content. Sarah stared out the window, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts she couldn't voice. Every word he'd spoken during his speech replayed in her head, each one laced with a bitter undertone, now that she had seen the look he shared with Rebecca. "So, what did you think of the party?" James asked, his tone light, as if testing the waters. "It was fine," Sarah replied, her voice flat. "Just fine." He glanced at her briefly, his brow furrowing. "I thought it went pretty well." Sarah didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands in her lap, her knuckles white as she gripped them tightly. "Everyone seems to admire you so much. You're quite the star, aren't you?" James chuckled, oblivious to the sharp edge in her voice. "Well, I've worked hard for it." The comment landed heavily between them. Sarah turned her gaze from the window to him, studying his profile. His relaxed demeanor only fueled her anger. She wanted to confront him then and there, to demand answers, but the car felt too small, too enclosed for the storm brewing inside her. When they pulled into the driveway, James parked and turned off the engine. He reached for his briefcase in the back seat, then glanced at her again. "You've been quiet tonight. Everything okay?" Sarah forced a smile, the kind she had perfected over years of putting others' feelings before her own. "Just tired." James nodded, seemingly satisfied, and got out of the car. Sarah stayed seated for a moment, gripping the door handle, trying to calm the tempest inside her. She stepped out slowly, the cool night air brushing her face as she followed him into the house. Inside, the house felt too quiet, too empty. James set his briefcase down by the stairs and loosened his tie. "I'm going to take a shower," he said casually, already heading upstairs. Sarah watched him go, her mind churning. The sight of his retreating figure, so familiar, yet suddenly so foreign, sent a fresh wave of anger through her. The man she had shared her life with for over 3 decades, the father of her children, had betrayed her in the most intimate way. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. Once she heard the water running upstairs, Sarah moved swiftly. She grabbed her laptop from the kitchen counter and sat at the dining table. The glow of the screen illuminated her face as she opened her email. Her fingers trembled as she typed in the search bar. Asterisk, Rebecca, asterisk. The messages appeared instantly, a thread of exchanges between James and his co-worker. Each email was more damning than the last, flirtatious banter, shared jokes, and subtle references to secret meetings. Her breath hitched as she read them, her stomach twisting in knots. One message stood out. It was sent just days ago, confirming a reservation at a boutique hotel downtown. Sarah stared at the screen, her pulse pounding in her ears. She felt the weight of betrayal settle over her, cold and suffocating. Her mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How could he look her in the eye and lie so effortlessly? She closed the laptop with trembling hands, her heart heavy with the truth. Upstairs, the sound of the water stopped, and Sarah heard James moving around. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. This wasn't the moment to confront him, not yet. She needed time, a plan, and above all, undeniable proof. Tonight was just the beginning. As she climbed the stairs to their bedroom, she felt a strange mix of determination and sorrow. The man she thought she knew was gone, replaced by someone she could no longer trust. But she wasn't ready to let him know what she had uncovered. Not yet. The confrontation would come, but it would be on her terms, in her moment. She would make sure of that. The morning light streamed through the bedroom curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. Sarah lay awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, replaying every detail of the previous night. James slept beside her, his breathing even and calm, as if the world hadn't just shifted irreparably between them. She turned her head slightly to look at him, the man she had once trusted implicitly. Now, every breath he took seemed to mock her. She slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him. Padding downstairs, she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. She couldn't resist looking again. The emails stared back at her, glaring evidence of his betrayal. She scrolled through them, her chest tightening with each message. Her hand hovered over the phone. She needed someone to talk to, someone she could trust. Without thinking, she dialed Laura's number. "Morning," Laura's voice came through, groggy but warm. "Is everything okay?" Sarah hesitated, her throat tightening. I don't know." "What's going on?" Laura asked, her tone shifting to concern. Sarah took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "It's James. I know. He's having an affair." The line went silent for a moment before Laura spoke again. "Sarah, are you sure? That's a serious accusation." "I found emails," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Messages between him and Rebecca. They've been meeting in hotels, Laura. He's been lying to me for months." Laura exhaled sharply. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Do you want me to come over?" "No, not yet," Sarah said, shaking her head as if Laura could see her. "I need to figure out what to do next." "You don't have to do this alone," Laura said firmly. "Whatever you need, I'm here." Sarah thanked her, feeling a small measure of comfort in her friend's unwavering support. But as she ended the call, the weight of the situation pressed down on her again. This wasn't just about the emails or the affair. It was about the years they had spent together, the family they had built, and the life she thought they shared. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of James descending the stairs. She quickly closed the laptop, her heart racing. He entered the kitchen, stretching and yawning, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside her. "Morning," he said casually, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," Sarah replied, her voice carefully neutral. James nodded, sipping his coffee. "Big day today. I have to meet with some people from the office about tying up loose ends." Sarah resisted the urge to ask if Rebecca would be there. Instead, she forced a smile and said, "Busy as always." He chuckled. "Retirement isn't quite what I expected. Feels like I'm busier now than ever." She said nothing, watching him closely. His calm demeanor infuriated her, but she held her tongue. Let him think she was none the wiser. She had her own plans, and they didn't involve tipping him off just yet. As James left the house, Sarah sat back down at the table, her mind racing. She needed more than just emails. If she was going to confront him, she wanted irrefutable proof. Her son Tom's voice echoed in her mind. He was always tinkering with technology, always saying how easy it was to track things these days. Maybe he could help, without even realizing it. Grabbing her phone, she dialed Tom's number. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" "Tom, do you have a minute? I need some help with something. Technical." "Sure," he said, his tone brightening. "What do you need?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, then plunged ahead. "Your dad's been using his phone and computer a lot for work stuff, and I just want to make sure everything's backed up properly. Can you show me how to access it?" Tom laughed. "Mom, are you spying on Dad's spreadsheets? He's retiring, not running a secret agency." She forced a laugh. "Just humor me, will you?" Okay, Tom said. "I'll swing by this evening." As she hung up, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. If Tom could show her how to access James's devices, she might uncover more evidence, enough to leave no room for denial. The confrontation was coming, and she would be ready, but for now, she had to keep her composure, playing the part of the oblivious wife while she laid the groundwork for the storm ahead. The afternoon passed slowly, each tick of the clock stretching the hours into an eternity. Sarah busied herself with mundane tasks, cleaning the house and organizing drawers that hadn't been touched in years, anything to keep her mind from spiraling. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the ordinary, her thoughts always returned to James, to Rebecca, to the weight of what she had uncovered. When Tom arrived that evening, his presence brought a brief sense of normalcy. He hugged her tightly, his easy smile a balm for her frayed nerves. "Hey, Mum, what's with the tech emergency?" Sarah managed a chuckle. "It's not an emergency. I just want to make sure your dad's files are backed up before he retires. You know how he is with technology." Tom nodded, setting his bag on the kitchen table and pulling out his laptop. "Good idea. Where's Dad now?" "He's out meeting some colleagues," Sarah said, keeping her tone casual. She handed Tom James's laptop, her hands steady despite the churn of emotions inside her. "I thought I'd get a head start." Tom opened the laptop and began typing. "It's easy to set up backups. I'll show you how to access them too, in case you need to find something later." Sarah watched him work, her heart pounding. She couldn't let him see her nerves, couldn't let him know this was more than a simple request. "Thanks, sweetheart. You've always been my go-to for this stuff." He grinned. "It's my calling, apparently." As Tom navigated through the system, Sarah made mental notes. He showed her how to access synced files, where to find recent activity logs, and even how to retrieve deleted emails. She nodded along, absorbing every detail, her mind already racing with how she would use this information later. "There," Tom said finally, leaning back in his chair. "All set. Now you can find anything Dad's working on. Just don't tell him I showed you this, or I'll never hear the end of it." Sarah forced a laugh, patting his shoulder. "Your secret's safe with me." After Tom left, the house felt quiet again, the kind of silence that pressed against her ears. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at James's laptop. The urge to look was immediate and overwhelming, but she knew she needed to be careful. If James noticed her snooping, her plan would unravel before she had a chance to act. She decided to start with the synced files Tom had pointed out. Her fingers moved across the trackpad, opening folders and scrolling through documents. Most of it was innocuous, work memos, spreadsheets, retirement planning forms. But then she found a folder labeled asterisk, private asterisk. Her breath hitched as she clicked on it, revealing a series of files with innocuous names that felt anything but. One file stood out. Weekend trip. She opened it, her stomach twisting as she saw a series of receipts and confirmations for a hotel reservation, the same one mentioned in the emails. Dates, amounts, even a note requesting a quiet, romantic corner room. Her hands trembled as she saved copies of everything, her determination growing stronger with every click. Another file contained photos. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the touchpad. When she finally clicked, a series of images filled the screen. James and Rebecca smiling at a conference, standing too close at a dinner, their hands brushing in a way that felt far too intimate. Each image was a dagger, driving deeper into her chest. She closed the laptop and leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding. The proof was undeniable now. The affair wasn't just a suspicion or a gut feeling, it was real, tangible, and staring her in the face. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. It was a message from Laura. "How are you holding up?" Sarah typed back quickly. "I have everything I need. It's worse than I thought." Laura's response came almost immediately. "I'm here whenever you're ready." Sarah stared at the screen, her resolve hardening. She wasn't ready to confront James yet. Not tonight. But the time was coming, and when it did, she wouldn't just demand answers. She would demand the truth, every ugly piece of it. Until then, she would play her part, bide her time, and prepare for the moment when she would expose everything. The days that followed were a study in controlled tension. Sarah moved through the motions of her daily life with a calm exterior, but underneath, a storm brewed. She kept her discoveries hidden, playing the role of the supportive wife while silently observing James. Every smile he gave her, every casual comment about his day, felt like an insult. Yet she said nothing, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her opportunity came sooner than she expected. One evening, James came home late, his face flushed and his tie askew. He kissed her on the cheek, the faint smell of alcohol lingering on his breath. "Sorry I'm late," he said, setting his briefcase down by the door. "Got caught up with the guys." Sarah nodded, feigning nonchalance. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, just some last-minute details for the retirement paperwork," he said, heading toward the kitchen. "You know how it is." She followed him, watching as he poured himself a glass of scotch. His casual demeanor only fueled her anger. How easily he lied. How effortlessly he pretended everything was fine. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. She had to remind herself that she wasn't ready yet. She needed more than anger. She needed precision. "Busy week," she said, leaning against the counter. "You've been out a lot lately." James glanced at her, his expression briefly flickering with something, guilt, perhaps, or suspicion. "Just tying up loose ends," he said, swirling the scotch in his glass. "It'll slow down soon." Sarah smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. It'll be nice to have you home more." He nodded, his gaze dropping to his drink. "Yeah, it will." That night, after James had fallen asleep, Sarah sat in the dim glow of the living room, the laptop open on the coffee table. She couldn't sleep, not with the weight of everything she'd discovered pressing on her. She opened the folder containing the photos and emails again, her resolve hardening with each damning piece of evidence. Her phone buzzed, startling her. It was another message from Laura. "Any updates?" Sarah hesitated before typing back, "I'm almost ready. Just need one more thing." Laura replied instantly, "Be careful, Sarah. You're walking a fine line." She knew Laura was right. James was sharp, and if he sensed what she was doing, he'd try to outmaneuver her. But Sarah wasn't the same woman she'd been weeks ago. She was sharper now too, and determined to see this through. The next morning, Sarah made a decision. She called the hotel mentioned in the emails, her heart pounding as she waited for the receptionist to answer. When they did, she kept her voice calm and pleasant, explaining that she needed a copy of a receipt from a recent stay for her records. The receptionist hesitated, but eventually agreed to send the details to her email. Within minutes, the receipt appeared in her inbox. Sarah opened it, her chest tightening as she read the details. James's name was there, along with Rebecca's. It was the final confirmation she needed. There was no more doubt, no more room for denial. The confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when. That evening, James was unusually cheerful. He chatted about his day, joked about his colleagues, and even suggested they take a weekend trip after his retirement. Sarah nodded along, her smile frozen in place, her mind racing. He was trying to distract her, she realized, to keep her from noticing the cracks in his facade. But it was too late for that. As they sat down to dinner, Sarah watched him closely, her heart a mix of anger and sadness. She had loved this man, built a life with him, and now she saw him for who he truly was, a liar, a betrayer. But she also saw something else, vulnerability. He wasn't as invincible as he pretended to be, and she would use that to her advantage. By the time they cleared the dishes, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm. The confrontation was near, and she was ready. She had the evidence, the plan, and the determination. Now, all she needed was the perfect moment to lay it all bare. And that moment was coming, sooner than James could ever anticipate. The morning of the confrontation dawned crisp and clear, a deceptive contrast to the storm Sarah felt brewing inside her. The day was filled with preparations for James's official retirement gathering, a larger, more formal event than the party held with his colleagues. This one was meant for family, friends, and a broader circle of acquaintances. Sarah went through the motions, arranging catering, coordinating with the venue, and fielding calls, all while maintaining her outward composure. Inside, however, she was a tempest of emotions: anger, betrayal, determination. She had decided that this event, with its carefully curated audience, would be the setting for the truth to come out. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who had spent years crafting his image as the perfect husband and professional would have that image shattered in a single evening. By the time the guests began arriving, the house was buzzing with laughter and conversation. Sarah moved through the crowd, greeting familiar faces and exchanging pleasantries, all while keeping an eye on James. He was in his element, shaking hands and smiling warmly, the picture of charm and ease. Rebecca arrived an hour into the event, and Sarah's stomach turned when she saw her. Rebecca wore a sleek black dress, her smile radiant, as if she hadn't spent the last year dismantling someone else's life. Sarah felt Laura's hand on her arm and turned to see her friend's concerned expression. "You okay?" Laura asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the hum of conversation. "I'm fine," Sarah said, though her tone was clipped. "Just waiting," Laura nodded, giving her a squeeze. "I'm right here if you need me." As the evening wore on, James stepped up to give a speech, much like he had at the previous party. The room quieted as he took the microphone, his smile broad as he looked out over the crowd. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady and warm. "It's been an incredible journey, and I couldn't have done it without the support of my family, my friends, and my colleagues." Sarah stood at the back of the room, her arms crossed tightly, her jaw clenched. The words felt hollow, a performance for an audience he was determined to impress. Her heart pounded as she waited for the right moment. "And of course," James continued, his eyes finding Sarah in the crowd, "I have to thank my incredible wife, Sarah. She's been my rock through everything." The applause was immediate, the crowd turning to Sarah, who forced a smile and nodded graciously. But inside, she was boiling. She felt Laura's steady presence beside her, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. When the applause died down, James began recounting anecdotes from his career, weaving stories that painted him as a dedicated professional and a loving husband. Sarah watched him, her anger mounting with each word. Finally, as he neared the end of his speech, she stepped forward. "James," she said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the room like a knife. He paused, startled, as the crowd turned to her. "Sarah, you forgot to thank one other person," she said, her gaze unwavering. "Rebecca." A ripple of confusion swept through the crowd. Rebecca, standing near the bar, froze, her smile faltering. James's face paled. "Sarah, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the emails," she said, her voice growing sharper. "The hotel receipts, the photos. Should I keep going?" The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. All eyes were on them now, the crowd holding its collective breath. Rebecca's face was a mask of horror, her drink trembling in her hand. "Sarah," James said, his voice low and urgent, "this isn't the time." "Oh, it's exactly the time," Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. You've spent your entire life building this perfect image, and tonight, everyone here is going to see the truth." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder, slapping it down on the nearest table. "Emails, photos, receipts, everything you tried to hide." James's hands clenched at his sides, his face a mixture of anger and panic. "We should talk about this privately." "Why? So you can lie to me some more? So you can manipulate the situation like you've done all along?" Sarah's voice trembled with fury. "No, James. I'm done protecting you." The room erupted into whispers, guests exchanging stunned glances. Laura stepped forward, her expression firm, standing beside Sarah as a silent show of support. Rebecca, visibly shaken, attempted to slip out, but Sarah's voice stopped her. "Don't bother, Rebecca. Everyone knows now." James opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time, he looked small, diminished, his carefully constructed facade crumbling around him. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, the atmosphere charged with disbelief and tension. Sarah felt a strange sense of relief, as if a weight she'd carried for months had finally been lifted. She turned to the crowd, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," she said, walking out of the room with her head held high, leaving James to face the fallout of his lies. As she stepped outside, the cool night air hit her face, and she exhaled deeply. Laura followed her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did it," Laura said softly. Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I did." But as she stood there, a new thought crept into her mind, a question that would linger long after the confrontation. What now? The aftermath of the confrontation rippled through their lives like an earthquake. The party dissolved into chaos after Sarah's exit, with guests exchanging hurried whispers and stolen glances at James, who was left to salvage whatever remained of his dignity. Rebecca had disappeared almost immediately, leaving James to field the fallout alone. By the time Sarah returned home later that night, James was sitting in the dimly lit living room, his head in his hands. "You humiliated me," he said, his voice low and sharp when she walked in. His tone carried anger, but also a note of defeat. Sarah dropped her purse onto the counter and turned to him, her face a mask of calm determination. "You humiliated yourself, James. All I did was reveal the truth." "You didn't have to do it like that," he said, standing now, his frustration bubbling over. "In front of everyone? Our family? Our friends?" Sarah stepped closer, her voice steady but laced with anger. "And where was your consideration for me, James? Where was your concern for our family when you decided to cheat? Don't lecture me on how I should have handled your betrayal." He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped, his shoulders sagging as the weight of the situation seemed to hit him fully. "It wasn't supposed to get this far," he murmured, almost to himself. "But it did," Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. "And now you have to live with the consequences." They stood in silence for a moment, the tension between them thick and suffocating. James finally sank back onto the couch, rubbing his temples. "What happens now?" "I don't know," Sarah said honestly. "I need time to think, to figure out what's next." James nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the floor. For the first time in years, he seemed truly vulnerable, stripped of the arrogance and confidence that had always defined him. But Sarah wasn't ready to feel pity, not yet. She left the room without another word, heading upstairs to the bedroom. As she closed the door behind her, the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. She sank onto the bed, her hands shaking as the reality of everything crashed over her. The confrontation had been a victory, but it felt hollow. The pain of betrayal still lingered, and the question of what to do next loomed large in her mind. The days following the party were a blur of awkward silences and forced conversations. James stayed home more, clearly trying to make amends in small, superficial ways, cooking dinner, fixing things around the house, even cleaning the garage. But Sarah saw through it. His gestures, while appreciated on some level, couldn't erase the damage he'd done. One morning, as Sarah sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee, her phone buzzed with a new email. She opened it, her breath catching as she read the subject line, "We need to talk." It was from Rebecca. Her heart raced as she opened the message. Rebecca's tone was surprisingly composed, almost apologetic. "I know I've caused you a lot of pain, and I owe you an explanation. There are things you don't know about James, things you deserve to hear. If you're willing to meet, I think it might help you understand everything." Sarah stared at the email, her emotions swirling. What more could Rebecca possibly reveal? And could she trust anything that came from her? But a part of Sarah, the part that had been blindsided by James's betrayal, felt compelled to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She replied curtly, "Tomorrow, noon, Café Del Mar." The next day, Sarah arrived at the small cafe, her stomach tied in knots. Rebecca was already there, sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She looked up as Sarah approached, her expression a mixture of guilt and apprehension. "Thank you for meeting me," Rebecca said softly as Sarah sat down. "I'm not here for pleasantries," Sarah replied, her tone cold. "What do you have to say?" Rebecca sighed, looking down at her cup. "I didn't come here to justify what I did. There's no excuse for that. But you need to know that James, he's not who you think he is." Sarah's stomach churned. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "I found these a few months ago. I wasn't sure what to do with them, but after what happened at the party, I couldn't stay silent." Sarah opened the folder, her hands trembling. Inside were financial documents, bank statements and emails, evidence of something much darker than an affair. James had been embezzling money from his company for years, using Rebecca as an unwitting accomplice. "Why are you showing me this?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "Because you deserve to know the truth," Rebecca said. "I got dragged into this mess because I trusted him. But now I'm as much a victim as you are." Sarah felt a cold dread settle over her. The affair had been devastating enough. But this was a betrayal on an entirely different level. She closed the folder and looked Rebecca in the eye. "What do you want me to do with this?" Rebecca shook her head. "That's up to you. But if I were you, I'd make sure he faces the consequences." As Sarah left the cafe, the weight of the folder in her hands felt like a ticking time bomb. The confrontation had been the beginning, but now she realized it was far from the end. The life she thought she knew was unraveling piece by piece, and she would have to decide whether to let it fall apart completely or to rebuild it on her terms. The confrontation at the retirement party was a turning point, not just for Sarah, but for everyone involved. In a single evening, the facade of perfection shattered, exposing the hidden cracks in a life Sarah thought she knew. While the betrayal was devastating, it also forced Sarah to reevaluate her life, her values, and her worth. It was a painful reminder that even the most stable-seeming relationships can harbor secrets, but it also showed her the strength she didn't know she possessed. For James, the fallout was swift and unrelenting. His choices not only cost him his marriage, but also the respect of his family, friends, and colleagues. The affair and subsequent revelations forced him to confront the consequences of his actions, an act of reckoning that, for years, he had avoided. Rebecca, too, faced her own share of accountability, learning that the allure of shortcuts and complicity came with a price she wasn't ready to pay. Through it all, Sarah emerged not as a victim, but as a survivor. She chose to rebuild her life, one step at a time, focusing on her independence and happiness. Her journey reminds us that betrayal, while deeply painful, doesn't have to define the rest of our lives. It's in our darkest moments that we discover the strength to heal, grow, and move forward. Life, after all, isn't about how we fall, but how we rise. And Sarah rose, stronger than ever.